On my birthday, my brother texted, "Don't wait up. Everyone's at my promotion party instead." 10 minutes later, Dad messaged, "By the way, I put the $3,800 dinner on your card. Hope that's fine." I just replied, "Noted." That night, I blew out the candles alone, in a room meant for 60. At 2:47 a.m., I dropped a link in the family chat with one line. "Watch this before sunrise. My name is Mason, I'm 30, and I learned the rhythm of being sidelined before I learned how to parallel park. I'm the eldest, the reliable one, which in my family is a polite way of saying the person you can lean on until the hinges squeal. I'm the quiet cousin who shows up early to move tables, the nephew who remembers Aunt June's sugar-free cake, the son who answers calls after midnight when a ride is needed or a payment slips someone's mind. You would think that comes with goodwill, or at least a seat that isn't half-tilted and sticky with spilled soda at the kids' table. But in our house, reliability was a pretext. It made it easier to ask, easier to assume, easier to pretend that asking was something we had all agreed to. Mom's graduation photo hangs in the dining room. Her, beaming, cap too big, tassel crooked. She loves to tap the frame and say, "We're a family that gets it done." Dad, to his credit, got a lot done. He built a plumbing business that took him from a rattling pickup to a new truck every few years. But he also learned to narrate his hard work so loudly that no one noticed mine. He'd say, "Mason's steady, always the sensible one. Never Mason's talented or Mason's drowning." When I started my small design studio after college, building websites for local cafes and tiny law firms that still thought the internet was a phase, Dad shook my hand and said, "Proud of you." Then added, "Keep expenses low. No need to show off." When I brought my first client, a bakery with a line out the door by the third Saturday, Mom hugged me and said, "Make sure you help your brother with his resume." That was 2 days after I rewired their guest room into an office for him so he could focus, which in practice meant sleeping in and playing guitar until noon because inspiration supposedly comes late. My brother, Austin, is 26. He has a way of turning any room into a stage and any stage into a mirror. When we were kids, he memorized jokes and recited them to get extra dessert. Mom would laugh and say, "Oh, you're impossible," which meant another scoop of ice cream. I could fix a leaky sink or quietly negotiate with a landlord who threatened to keep our deposit because Dad forgot the final inspection, and Mom would say, "Thank you, sweetheart," like I had restocked the paper towels. Austin's talent for attention matured into a talent for declarations. He declared he'd be a filmmaker, then a consultant, then in tech, which turned out to mean sales at a software company with an open office and unlimited cold brew. He got along with people instantly, which is a gift, but he also mistook instant for permanent and easy for earned. He believed doors were meant to be walked through without checking if they were his to open. The birthday dinner was supposed to be easy. I booked a long room at the back of my favorite restaurant, brick walls, a row of plants along a ledge, lighting soft enough to flatter everyone and bright enough to keep the food in color. I arranged a set menu so my parents wouldn't complain about prices at the table. Roasted chicken with rosemary, grilled vegetables, a pasta for the carb lovers, a fish for the healthy cousins, and a chocolate cake with a thin line of gold leaf around the edge because the pastry chef once told me it made people feel celebrated. I told the manager I'd guarantee a minimum, and he smiled and wrote 60 in neat pencil next to my name. I sent the group invitation 3 weeks early, a cheerful message, casual, with a note at the end. "No gifts. Presents is the present." I knew some people would flake. That's normal. But it still felt good to imagine my parents near the center, my aunt and uncle debating the merits of the fish, my cousins catching me up on their internships or new dogs. I imagined my brother clapping me on the back and saying something dramatic like, "To the guy who pretends he isn't the glue." My expectations weren't extravagant. I wanted to feel like I belonged to my own family. On the day itself, the weather cooperated. The late afternoon sky was the color of a ripe plum, and the air, for late summer, behaved itself. Not humid, not windy, a gentle warmth that made the walk from the parking lot pleasant. I arrived early, like I always do, to check the place cards I pretended not to care about and leave small envelopes at a few seats, little handwritten thank you notes for the people who had made rough months easier. My friend Elias, who helped me with bookkeeping when my brain short-circuited from numbers, my neighbor who fed my cat during a 30-hour work sprint, my cousin Nina who sent kind messages whenever she sensed I'd gone quiet. I tipped the servers up front because I know how gratitude changes posture. Then I stepped back and took it in. 60 chairs, polished, rows of plates, silverware aligned like quiet soldiers. Cake hidden in the kitchen like a surprise waiting for a cue. My name on the chalkboard at the entrance. Happy 30th, Mason. It was small, simple, and, to me, perfect. At 6:40 p.m., I got a text from Austin. Running a bit late. Pre-party thing with coworkers. Don't start the speeches without me, faced with tears of joy. I smiled anyway. That was him. I wrote back. No speeches. See you soon. I began to greet people as they trickled in. 2 friends from the gym I always promised to attend more regularly. My neighbor with her kid who tugged at her sleeve to ask if I was the one who makes websites, which I loved. 7 o'clock arrived, then 7:15. The room had maybe 15 people by then, which is enough to feel warm but not enough to fill the space. Mom texted at 7:21. Traffic. We'll be there soon, honey. Dad's message followed at 7:22. Save us seats near the front. I walked to the staff and asked them to hold the chicken in the oven a few more minutes to keep the vegetables from cooling. Of course, the manager said, eyes apologetic, like he knew a promise was being tested. At 7:43, my phone buzzed with Austin's text. Promotion party at the foundry is insane. The CEO is here. Literally everyone. Don't wait up. We'll swing by after. I stared, read it again, and felt a hollow spot open under my ribs like a trapdoor. I typed congrats, then deleted it, then typed have fun, then deleted that too, and finally wrote got it, because I was not going to beg a younger brother to attend my birthday. I breathed in, held it, and told myself people mattered more than moments. That missing one night didn't make my family cruel, just busy. I told myself things we tell ourselves to survive the small cuts we later realized were not small. My parents' messages came at 7:51, minutes apart. Mom, heading to Foundry to celebrate with Austin. We'll bring the whole gang after. Don't be mad. It's a big night for him. Dad, huge crowd here. CEO shouted him out on stage. By the way, for your dinner, I told the restaurant to run the bill on your card since they needed a card on file. Hope that's fine. Easier this way. Easier for whom? I stared at the words, hope that's fine, and could hear my father's voice, practical, casual, like he was telling me the dry cleaning would be ready by Monday. He wasn't asking. He was informing, trusting the narrative that I was the steady son who could absorb a $3,800 charge like a pothole in a dependable car. I glanced at the rows of empty chairs. The room echoed with silverware clinking on plates from the tables we had filled, the diminished laughter of 15 people doing their best to pretend the space wasn't built for a crowd that hadn't arrived. I'm not naive. I know families can be messy without being malicious. I know scheduling can fail, and a promotion party with a CEO carries a certain gravity. I know generosity can coexist with blindness. But what stunned me was the choreography of it, how neatly it fell into a pattern as old as our photo albums. My brother at the center, my parents orbiting, and me, the moon, expected to keep the tide steady. I walked to the hallway and swallowed. That tight swallow that feels like folding a paper airplane in your throat. I sent a message to the manager. We're going to shorten the event. Could we bring out cake soon? I asked him to box a portion of the meals for takeaway. He nodded, the kind man who had already guessed I would do the responsible thing. My friends noticed. Elias squeezed my shoulder and said softly, we can move to the smaller room. Less weird. I shook my head because I didn't want to flee my own party. My neighbor's kid asked, are your parents coming? And his mom shushed him with a quick, embarrassed smile. We sang anyway. It was sincere. I blew out the candles and felt the oddest mix of warmth and humiliation, gratitude for the people who had come, and a bone-deep ache for the family whose absence wasn't neutral but pointed, like being left out of a photograph on purpose. I made polite toasts. I laughed a little too loud at jokes that didn't warrant it. I gathered envelopes that looked silly in a nearly empty room. By 9:30, the night was mostly over. A few stragglers lingered to hug me tightly, in that way people do when they suspect something cracked a little inside you. I sat alone at the head of the table for a moment after they'd left, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the scuff of a server's shoes as she swept. Then I paid. The total, with tip, came to $3,812.46. I signed my name and underlined it because suddenly I needed proof of something, that I existed concretely enough to leave a mark. On the drive home, my phone lit with photos in the family chat. Austin beaming with a glass in his hand. Mom's caption, "So proud." Dad's blurry selfie with the "so" like a stamp of approval. I didn't respond. I thought of the past year, the weekends I'd spent helping Dad redesign his company's website, the nights I'd given up sleep to redo Austin's resume after he'd flubbed a deadline, the loan I'd extended to Mom when her card hit its limit, a loan repaid not with money, but with promises that felt like IOUs written in disappearing ink. I thought of how, when I got appendicitis last winter, Austin dropped off a balloon bouquet and then texted, "Can you check my cover letter?" I thought of the time Dad forgot my name during a toast at a cousin's engagement party and called me the dependable one, and everyone laughed like it was affectionate, and I stood there fighting the urge to walk into the street and keep going. I didn't plan the link at 2:47 a.m. while I was lighting a candle alone. The idea came later, as I sat at my kitchen table with the box of leftover cake unopened because sweetness felt at odds with how the night tasted. I opened my laptop and stared at a folder I'd been keeping for months without admitting to myself what it meant. I had receipts, literal and otherwise, texts, invoices, email threads, a neat log of the countless times I had covered, fixed, rescued, buffered. Not because I wanted to use them as weapons, but because I am, by nature, a record keeper. Because when you're the one who smooths surfaces, you learn to track where the bumps are. I'd started compiling them after Dad scolded me in front of relatives for not stepping up during an aunt's hospital stay. A week when I had slept on a chair in her room and arranged her insurance paperwork while he took calls in the hallway. He apologized later privately, said he was stressed, and I said I understood. But I created the folder anyway. Just in case, I told myself, though I never named the case. If you asked me why this hurt more than the other hurts, I could list the usual suspects: the symbolism of a birthday, the visible absence, the cheap way money replaced apology, but that's not it. What hurt was the confirmation that I could be erased in real time by people who know my middle name and my favorite tea. That they would not show up and then hand me the bill felt less like oversight and more like a confession. We expect you to carry it. You always have. You always will. Sometimes the truth doesn't arrive like a revelation, but like a ledger finally balanced. I'm not reckless. I don't rage post or torch bridges without mapping the exits. I sat there and breathed and let the first wave pass. Then I began to assemble. I drafted, I trimmed, I set things in order like a lawyer preparing a closing argument no one would be able to shrug off. I thought about tone, not cruel, not dramatic, just clear. I thought about audience, my family, but also the part of me that needed to see everything laid out plainly. I thought about timing, the hour when parties end and phones are plugged and charging, when people wake hazy and honest. And as the file exported and the upload bar crawled, I thought about the kid version of me who believed that if he kept everything running, they would one day look at him and say, "We see you." At 2:47 a.m., my phone buzzed once with the notification that the upload was complete. I stared at the link. My thumb hovered over send in the family chat, the same group where Dad's blurry selfie still sat above a stream of gold confetti emojis. Somewhere across town, the last of Austin's friends would be haggling over an after-party. Mom would be wrapping leftovers in foil at someone else's kitchen. Dad would be telling a story about grit and pride. The apartment felt very quiet. The cake box on the counter was folded shut like a mouth holding back a sentence. I breathed in and felt the night thicken, felt the point between mercy and memory press against me like a coin I'd kept hidden in my palm for too long. I tapped the screen, the link dropped into the thread, and as I watched the typing indicators tremble awake, I realized there was one thing I hadn't considered: not how they would respond, but who I would be if they did. When I woke up, there were already 37 messages in the family thread, a mix of heart emojis, question marks, and the kind of quick-fire defensiveness you get when people read something that makes their stomachs drop. The link sat there between Dad's selfie and a photo of champagne flutes, neutral and blue, as if a simple shape could be anything but a loaded door. I had titled the video "Running Tabs," and it opened with timestamps, then widened into quiet scenes I'd captured over the past year. Me sitting in the emergency room with Aunt Lila while Dad texted that he would come as soon as this call wraps. A screenshot of the hotel receipt I put on my card when Mom's fell through in front of her friends. A series of messages from Austin asking me to spot him on rent because his commission was about to hit. I didn't editorialize. I let the dates and the math do the talking. The final minute was my birthday dinner receipt, the $3,812.46 zooming in like a lens tightening on a truth. I ended on a single sentence. If love is presence, then count with me. Mom had written first at 3:06 a.m. Mason, honey, this feels so cold. We need to talk as a family, not like this. Dad followed at 3:08. You blindsided us. You know the business has ups and downs, and we always make it right. Then Austin at 3:23. Bro, why are you twisting stuff? You've always said you're happy to help. The word twisting landed like a stone under my tongue. By 7:15 a.m., a new wave rolled in, this time with the tone people use when they're sure the best defense is a confident story. Dad wrote, your video ignores the vacations we took you on, the Christmas gifts, the way we helped you get your first apartment. He attached a photo from a Florida trip when I was 15. I remember that trip. I spent 2 days finding a mechanic when the rental car died because Dad refused to pay the inflated airport rate. In the photo, I'm smiling. It would be easy to look at a smile and call it proof. The call started around 8 a.m., a mix of relatives and two numbers I didn't recognize. I let them go to voicemail. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. I didn't want to fight in the chat. I didn't want to fight at all. What I wanted, stubbornly, was acknowledgement, a word that means something a lot gentler than justice and sometimes feels harder to get. I opened my email and found a message from my Aunt Nina, who has always been the quiet watcher in our family. For what it's worth, I saw you at the hospital last winter. I saw. If they pretend they didn't, that's on them. I read it twice and let it steady me like a hand on my back. By 9:30 a.m., Dad shifted to logistics, his native language. Let's have lunch. Your mother is making roast chicken. We can talk like adults and clear the air. I asked, who will be there? He replied, me, Mom, your brother, Uncle Rob if he swings by. I pictured the living room, the leather couch that squeaks, the heavy bowl of decorative shells, the photo wall arranged so that Austin's frames tilt forward a degree more than mine, like even the glass is leaning in his direction. My parents' house has always been a museum to what my father understands as accomplishment, plaques, certificates, tools mounted on the garage wall like a military display. There are two of my diplomas in the hallway. One is crooked. It has been crooked for 5 years. When I straighten it, it drifts back within days, as though the nail itself prefers the skewed story. I agreed to come by in the afternoon, not because I believed the air would clear, but because refusing would let them say I was the one keeping distance. I told myself I could hold a line without raising my voice. I told myself I could listen without being enrolled in their version of events. Before I left, I printed out a single-page summary from the folder, dates, amounts, brief descriptions, a ledger of the past 20 months. I slid it into a manila envelope, not as ammunition, but as proof in case words drifted into fog. On the drive over, I hit a red light near the street where we grew up. The old neighborhood still had the same elm trees, the same cracked basketball hoop with a net that's more absence than string. I remembered a day in 8th grade when I won the science fair. My teacher had encouraged me to enter a regional competition. The ceremony was the same night as one of Austin's soccer games. Dad promised to split the time. Mom promised to take photos for me to show Grandma. When I stood on the stage to accept my medal, I looked out and saw my teacher clapping and my friend's mom waving. My family didn't make it. Later that night, Austin told me about his game-winning assist. Mom hugged me and said, there will be lots of other medals. It wasn't a cruel sentence. It was casual. That's how some losses arrive, not with a slam, but with a shrug. At the house, the smell of roast chicken was soft and familiar, threaded with time. Mom met me at the door with a tense smile that favored one corner. You made a movie about us, she said, half joke, half accusation. A video, I said. Movies have budgets. She drew me into a hug that lasted 1 second longer than necessary, and then stepped back to study my face, like she could diagnose the event by checking my eyes. Dad called from the den. Let's talk before the food gets cold. He was standing by the mantel, hands in his pockets, the posture of a man about to deliver feedback at a staff meeting. Austin was on the couch, one ankle tossed over his knee, the pose of rehearsed ease. We started, as families do, in the shallow end. "We love you," Mom said. "We're proud of you," Dad added, in the same tone he uses when he tells a subcontractor to run a line of pipe through the back wall. "We just wish you had come to us before you published something." Austin swiped on his phone and said, "It wasn't fair to frame it that way. You make it look like we're moochers." I said evenly. "I framed it with dates." Mom said, "Dates don't capture context." Dad nodded, relieved to have a word he could deploy. "Context," he repeated, as if saying it made it appear. The conversation moved like a train along well-worn track. I named specifics. They broadened them into principles. I read a text where Dad had promised to pay me back for the hotel within the week. He said, "We had a pipe burst at the same time. You know how that goes." I mentioned the resume work I'd done at 2 a.m. before client meetings. Austin laughed softly and said, "You like staying up late." I referenced the hospital nights. Mom said, "We were there in spirit, and it was hard for us too." They weren't cruel. That's the strangest part. They were practiced, skilled at the art of excusing with tenderness. It's a family dialect. Soften the edges until the shape disappears. Dad switched to his favorite hypothetical. If we measured every favor, love would become math. I unfolded the envelope and slid the single page across the coffee table. "I'm not measuring love," I said. "I'm measuring the story that keeps being told. The one where I can cover it. The one where my needs rank second because I'm steady." Austin glanced at the page. "You formatted this," he said, like the offense wasn't the content but the clean lines that made it undeniable. "You're so formal." I could feel the old heat rise. The desire to rip the page and shout, or to go silent and leave. I did neither. "I'm precise," I said. "There's a difference." Mom took the page and scanned down the items. "At Christmas gifts," she brightened. "See? We give too. The drone we bought you." I looked at her. "I returned the drone to pay the past due on your visa, Mom." She blinked. "That was months later." "It was 4 days later," I said, steady. Dad inhaled sharply, the sound of a man about to choose pride over proximity. "We are not villains," he said. "Your video makes us look like villains." I shook my head. "It makes us look like what we are in this particular pattern." "That's not the same thing." Austin stood and paced, a move I recognized from his college debates when he needed momentum to fuel conviction. "You just hate that I'm finally doing well," he said, and there it was, the suspicion that my accounting was jealousy in disguise. "You've always been suspicious of my wins." I remembered the night he landed his job. I bought him dinner and then stayed up till dawn plugging his contacts into a spreadsheet so he could follow up efficiently. "I'm happy for you," I said quietly. "I've always been happy for you. I'm not happy being used as the family line of credit." "It was a celebration," he said. "We wanted you to join after. You could have come to Foundry." "To be handed a warm beer and a late apology?" I asked. "To watch the photos from a distance?" I spent the night in a room built for 60 people I invited because I believed I mattered enough to fill a room. We were quiet. The roast chicken cooled by increments. Mom wiped the corner of her eye with a knuckle, the gesture of someone trying not to smudge mascara as much as trying not to cry. "This is not how I imagined today," she said, voice small. "I imagined family." "This is family," I said, ugly included. Dad leaned forward, elbows on knees, fixing me with the look he uses to get a foreman to nod. "What do you want?" he asked. Not in the expansive sense, in the transactional sense. A number, a task, a checkbox he could complete to restore balance. I could see him mentally reaching for his wallet the way he reaches for a wrench, believing all problems are a form of plumbing. Find the leak, seal it, get back to work. Here's what I wanted: an understanding that presence comes before party, that my steadiness is not a blank check, that "we'll make it right" is a sentence that needs a date on a calendar. I wanted them to say the sentence children wish for even when they're grown: "We're sorry." That was wrong. I knew better than to make apologies a demand. So I named terms that were not emotional but enforceable. "No more charges on my cards without my prior written consent," I said. "If I lend money, we write it down with a repayment date. If I help with work, design, web, whatever, we scope it and you pay at market rate. And if you can't pay, we say that out loud and decide together whether I can donate the time. No invoices that vanish into gratitude." Mom flinched at the word "written," like putting family in ink made affection cold. Dad's mouth tightened. "That's Extreme, he said, as if extreme delicately meant not how we do things when it benefits me. Austin, who had been looking at his phone while I spoke, held it up suddenly. See? Even Nina thinks you went too far, he said, and read a fragment of a message. He's making a scene. He didn't read the next line, because I could see the rest from across the room. And sometimes you have to make a scene to repair the stage. Mom reached for the phone. Dad waved it down. We don't need a chorus, he said. We need a solution. Those are the terms, I said. And I want you to acknowledge what last night was. Not busy, not unfortunate. It was choosing Austin over me on my birthday, then billing me for it. I kept my voice even. I didn't trust it to be loud. Dad stood up. When he is angry, he gets quieter, not louder. I will not be told how to love my sons, he said. I have carried this family for 30 years. He pointed at the machine-perfect shelves he'd built in the garage. Those are mine. The roof? Mine. The opportunities you both enjoy? Mine. He looked at me, as if expecting me to nod like a foreman who has heard a speech many times and knows his part. I won't sign anything, he added, as if there had been a contract on the table. I won't be managed in my own home. The word managed had the sting of insult in his mouth. My phone buzzed. It was the restaurant manager from last night, a gentle man named Priyank. Just checking in, his message read. We have the leftover cake box you forgot. We can deliver it if needed. I stared at the word leftover like it was a verdict. Mom, trying to rescue the scene, said, we can at least eat. She lifted the lid on the chicken. Steam rose up like a curtain between acts. Please, she said, let's not let food go to waste. The phrase felt like a cousin of another. Don't let the moment go to waste by admitting what it is. Before we moved to the table, Austin said, can we talk about your video? His tone had shifted, less defensive, more calculating. You posted it unlisted, but you shared it in the family chat. People screenshot. You know how this goes. I looked at him. I'm aware. If this gets around, it could hurt me at work, he continued. It makes me look like I lean on others. It's not the image I want out there. I was struck by the phrasing, it's not the truth, but it's not the image. He was the boy who learned stagecraft, all grown up. Then maybe the behavior shouldn't exist for the image to capture, I said. I didn't tag your company. I blurred faces. I'm not out to torch you. He rubbed his jaw. Could you take it down after lunch? We'll figure out the money. Dad can write you a check for the dinner. We'll call the restaurant together so they know he's good for it. We'll do the optics. But take it down. It's not necessary anymore. He said anymore like the problem had already been solved by the idea of a check, even though no pen had touched paper. I felt the old tug, the urge to accept a half measure because it came wrapped in immediacy. A check would be soothing. A promise would be easier to file under progress and move on. But a part of me recognized the shape. A settlement without a precedent change, a single receipt paid while the narrative remained intact. I didn't answer. I let the silence extend just long enough to be uncomfortable. We sat to eat. The chicken was good. Mom had always been able to coax flavor out of simple things. She kept glancing at me like I was a guest of honor at a party that had gone off script. Dad carved slices with the precision of a man who has learned how to fix messes with tools and resents the ones that require words. Austin tried jokes, the friendly kind that say, let's reset. None of it landed. Midway through, my phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from an unknown number. This is Priya from HR at North Point. We received a link you might want to discuss. My chest tightened. North Point was Austin's company. I looked up at him. He was chewing, unaware. I didn't say anything. The room felt suddenly thinner, like the air had been pulled through a sieve. After lunch, Dad announced he had to swing by a site, the conversational equivalent of a dismissal. We'll follow up, he said. We always do. He meant money. He didn't mean patterns. Mom hugged me at the door, her forehead pressed to my cheek. You know your father, she whispered, a sentence that has excused more in our family than any apology has resolved. Austin walked me to the driveway. He kept his voice low. Please take it down, he said. Don't mess with my work. There it was, not, please don't hurt us, or please help us be better, but don't mess with my work. I measured my breath. I didn't send it to your office, I said. It's in a family thread. He glanced away. Threads travel, he said. On the drive home, I passed the field where our elementary school used to set up a carnival every June. I remembered the year Dad won a goldfish by tossing a ring over a bottle, and how Austin named it Captain and forgot to feed it, and how I was the one to wake early to shake flakes into the water and change it out before school so the bowl wouldn't smell. When the fish died, Austin cried like a storm. Mom held him. Dad told the story at dinner about his spirited son who loved hard. No one mentioned the boy who changed the water. That's what it is to be the steady one. People notice when you fail to show up, not when you never stop. At home, my inbox was a new geography. Two relatives had sent unasked for advice. Keep family matters in the family, one wrote. Money isn't everything. Another wrote, ironically, forgetting whom they built. My friend Elias had left a voice note. Whatever you do next, do it because you can live with it. I thought of the terms I'd outlined, the ones Dad called extreme. I thought of the email from HR, the way that message sat there quietly, a match dropped near kindling I hadn't arranged. I thought of the part of me that wanted a clean fix and the part that knew clean fixes are a kind of wishful thinking. I stared at the link to my video, thumb hovering over the toggle to make it private. Then my phone lit up with a call. Unknown number. I let it go. A voicemail arrived. I pressed play and heard a woman's voice. Crisp, professional. Hi, Mason. This is Priya from North Point HR. I'd like to clarify a few things you may not be aware of regarding last night's event and a subsequent expense authorization. Please call me back today if you can. Expense authorization. The phrase slotted itself into place like a bead in an abacus. I remembered Dad's message. I told the restaurant to run the bill on your card. I remembered the way he said easier this way. I opened my bank app and scrolled through pending charges. The dinner was there, settled. There was another authorization pending from a different venue, not the Foundry, an after-party lounge I didn't recognize, timestamped 1:14 a.m., the amount just shy of $900, labeled as pre-authorized. The card on file was mine. I hadn't set foot near that party. The pending line pulsed on my screen, a small hyphen that felt like a crack opening. I scrolled farther. Another hold at 1:52 a.m., rideshare line items in a cluster like constellations. All of it tied to a card that had been photographed once, 3 years ago. Just in case they need it for catering, Mom had said. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. Then I placed my phone flat on the table like evidence. I didn't hit play on Priya's message again. I didn't call anyone back. The apartment was quiet the way rooms are quiet after you finally hear a noise you've been convincing yourself wasn't there. I felt the line inside me tighten, the one between patience and permission. I took a breath and reached for my laptop, opened the folder named Running Tabs, and began to assemble a second page. I didn't title it. I chose the dates, set the columns, and in the field labeled Notes, I typed a single, simple sentence. Pre-authorization trail, confirm source. My phone buzzed with another call. The display read Priya, North Point HR. I watched it ring once, twice, 3 times. I let the last tone fade until it clicked to voicemail. Then I slid the laptop closer, positioned my fingers over the keys, and when the knock sounded on my door, 3 quick taps, too urgent to be my neighbor. I looked up and froze with the cursor blinking, the page half filled, and the question I had been circling finally standing outside, waiting to be let in. The knock at my door came again, harder this time, like whoever was outside wanted urgency to take the shape of wood splintering. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor, hard in my throat. Nobody just shows up at my apartment without texting first. When I looked through the peephole, I saw Austin. He wasn't alone. Behind him, slightly out of view, was Dad, arms crossed, jaw tight. I opened the door halfway, still blocking it with my shoulder. Austin looked pale, not from a hangover, but from something sharper, like fear mixed with anger. We need to talk. Now, he said, voice low but clipped. Dad stepped forward as if he owned the threshold. Mason, this isn't a request. We saw what you're doing. For a split second, I thought they meant the video. But then Austin shoved a crumpled envelope into my chest. Explain this. It was a bank statement. Not mine, but a photocopy of an account I didn't recognize, with my name printed across the top in block letters. The numbers didn't make sense. Transactions I hadn't made, payments I hadn't authorized, and worst of all, withdrawals in amounts too deliberate to be random. Thousands here, hundreds there, all siphoned into something labeled North Point Social Fund. My stomach sank. This isn't mine, I said instantly. My voice cracked with the kind of certainty that only comes when you know you're being framed. Dad's eyes narrowed. Then why is your name on it? Why is your card the one they traced? I turned the paper over, scanning. It was subtle but unmistakable. The same card digits I'd seen earlier on my account. The same ones Mom had snapped a photo of years ago for catering emergencies. I realized then that someone, likely Austin, had been using my card information as a ghost trail, tying all the late-night charges, the after-party lounges, even that $900 hold, back to me. And now it wasn't just family logistics. It was corporate. Austin's voice broke through my spinning thoughts. HR already called you, didn't they? They know. They're linking it to you. And if it sticks, I'm screwed. My promotion, my reputation, everything. He ran a hand through his hair. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to take the fall. The words felt unreal in my ears, like they'd come from a script too cruel to be performed. Excuse me. I whispered. Dad's face hardened. He's worked too hard for this. You don't want to drag your brother down over a mistake. A mistake. My voice rose. He stole my card. He charged me for an after party I didn't attend. He's been doing this for months, maybe years, and you want me to. Dad cut me off with the kind of authority that used to make me fall silent as a kid. It's family. Family handles things internally. If you admit it was you, if you let HR believe it, Austin keeps his job. We'll pay you back eventually. I stared at them, disbelief curdling into something heavier. The ledger in my head flipped open. All the years of me covering, smoothing, absorbing. And now they weren't just asking for money or time. They were asking me to wear guilt that wasn't mine, to sacrifice the only thing I had built, my name. Austin leaned in, eyes wide, almost desperate. You can survive it. You're the steady one, remember? You'll land on your feet. But me, this would ruin me. Don't be selfish. That last word hung between us like poison. Selfish. Me, the one who had given until my own birthday was spent in silence. Me, the one who had been the invisible scaffolding so he could stand on stage. And in that moment, standing in my own doorway with two men who shared my blood but not my loyalty, I realized this wasn't just favoritism anymore. This wasn't just being overlooked. This was betrayal, deliberate and complete. I tightened my grip on the envelope until the paper bent under my fingers. My voice, when it came, was steady. You're asking me to burn my life down so his can stay lit. Neither of them denied it. And that was the moment something in me, the last thin thread of patience, finally snapped. I didn't slam the door in their faces, though every muscle in me wanted to. I just let it close slowly, the latch clicking with a softness that felt wrong for what had just happened. For a long time I stood there, back against the wood, holding the envelope in my hand like it was radioactive. The betrayal didn't come all at once. It seeped in like cold water, filling the spaces between my ribs until it was hard to breathe. My own father had stood on my porch and told me to lie to protect my brother's career. My own brother had looked me in the eye and said I should take the fall because I was steady enough to survive it. When the silence finally settled, I stumbled to the couch and sat down, dropping the envelope on the coffee table. The room looked the same as it had an hour ago. Plants lined neatly by the window, a stack of design magazines on the shelf, the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen, but it felt hostile now, like everything was complicit in reminding me of how alone I was. I pressed the heels of my palms into my eyes until colors swirled, until the sting behind my eyelids drowned out the ache in my chest. The voicemail from HR still sat on my phone. I hadn't called back. I played it again, this time really listening. Priya's voice was careful, deliberate. We've had a few unusual authorizations come through on your card tied to last night's event. If you could confirm whether these are valid charges, it would help us resolve this. It wasn't an accusation yet, but I knew how quickly suspicion could turn into fact. If I didn't act, the silence itself would become an answer. I lay back on the couch, staring at the ceiling, letting the cracks in the paint blur until they looked like rivers on a map. And for the first time in years, I felt small in a way that wasn't comforting. My whole life, I'd worn the role of the reliable one like armor, convincing myself that patience and quiet would one day translate into respect. But in the span of 12 hours, that armor had been peeled away, leaving me exposed. Not just forgotten, not just used, betrayed outright. The worst part wasn't even the money or the charges. It was the realization that they had calculated this. Dad's casual tone, Austin's desperate logic. It wasn't instinct, it was a pattern sharpened over years. They had decided, somewhere along the way, that I was expendable. And I had let them decide that. That thought cut deeper than anything they said. By noon, I was still on the couch, stomach empty, head pounding from too much thinking and too little sleep. I thought about calling Elias, but I didn't want to hear sympathy yet. Sympathy made wounds real. Instead, I opened my laptop again and scrolled through the running tabs folder. Every receipt, every message, every late-night favor was right there, cold and undeniable. For a moment, I hovered over the delete button. Part of me thought maybe if I erased it all, I could erase the feeling too. Pretend it never happened. Pretend I hadn't seen what I saw in their eyes that morning. But my hand didn't move. I closed the folder instead. The rest of the day blurred. I tried working. A client wanted revisions on a homepage mock-up, but my hands kept shaking on the mouse. I tried eating. The cake box still sat unopened on the counter, but every bite tasted like dust. Around 3, I stepped outside for air, but the sunlight felt too harsh, the world too normal for the chaos in my head. Families walked by with strollers, neighbors waved hello, and I wanted to ask them if betrayal always felt this physical, if it always left you hollow and heavy at the same time. By evening, the phone buzzed again, Mom this time. Please, Mason, don't be dramatic. Let's fix this quietly. Her voice trembled in the voicemail, but there was no apology in it. Just another plea to absorb the damage so no one else had to. I sat in the dark, phone in hand, staring at the city lights outside my window. That was rock bottom, not because I was broke or because HR might call again, but because I realized my family's loyalty had limits, and I was on the outside of those limits. But as heavy as the silence was, something in me began to shift. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe anger, maybe the clarity that comes when you've been pushed past a line you didn't know existed. Quietly, without announcing it to anyone, I began to plan. I pulled the envelope back toward me and opened a new document on my laptop. I titled it Next Steps. Under it, I listed 3 simple points. Confirm charges with HR. Secure financial accounts. New cards, new passwords. Gather full record of family's use of my resources. The list was short, but it steadied me. It reminded me that even at rock bottom, there was ground beneath my feet, and I could still stand. I wasn't ready for revenge yet, not with the raw sting still bleeding, but I was ready to stop being their safety net. And for the first time all day, the thought of walking away didn't feel like defeat. It felt like the first step towards something I should have done years ago. The next morning, I woke with the kind of clarity that only comes after hitting the lowest point. The heaviness was still there, but now it had edges I could see, and that meant I could start cutting through it. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and began executing the list I had written the night before. First step, the bank. I called, explained the situation, and within an hour, my old card was canceled, new accounts secured, and fraud claims filed on the pending charges. The representative asked if I wanted to press further. We can investigate where the authorizations originated, she said. I told her yes, keep a full record. It was the first time I didn't feel guilty about protecting myself. For years, I had let its family stop me from drawing lines. Now, hearing the words fraud investigation felt less like a threat and more like a shield being fitted to my arm. Next step, HR. I called Priya back, my voice steadier than I expected. Those charges weren't mine, I said plainly. I have evidence that my card information was used without consent. I filed with my bank, and I can send you the case number. She was quiet for a moment, then said, Thank you for clarifying. We'll take this seriously. If you could email me the documentation, it will help us close this on our end. When I hung up, I realized my hands weren't shaking, not even a little. Over the next week, something shifted. Where I had been drained, I began to refill. Work became a lifeline. I threw myself into projects, and my focus sharpened with a kind of hunger I hadn't felt in years. The bakery client I had designed for months ago called again, asking me to lead a full rebrand, signage, packaging, everything. A local realtor wanted a modern site with virtual staging tools. Then, out of nowhere, Elias introduced me to a friend who ran a startup and needed a design lead. You'll love working with Mason, he told them. He doesn't miss a detail. That phrase, doesn't miss a detail, used to sound like a backhanded compliment, like I was meticulous but dull. Now, after the video, after the betrayal, it felt like power. I stopped answering every family call. I responded when I chose to, and only with short, direct replies. I can't help with that right now. I'm unavailable. The first few times I typed those words, I hesitated. But the more I said them, the lighter I felt. Within a month, my client list had doubled. The money I had feared losing because of the fraudulent charges was replaced, then surpassed, by the new work pouring in. I hired a part-time assistant to manage scheduling. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving deadlines. I was setting the terms. My little studio, the one Dad once told me to keep small so it doesn't embarrass you when it folds, had grown into something solid. I even registered a new LLC. Seeing the paperwork arrive in the mail, my name printed cleanly, no shadows of someone else's debts hanging over it, was like inhaling fresh air after years underground. But the biggest change wasn't the money or the business. It was me. I noticed it when I walked into a cafe to meet a client and didn't hunch into the background, waiting to be overlooked. I noticed it when I stood in front of a mirror before a presentation and thought, I look like someone who belongs in the center of the room. Even my posture felt different. Meanwhile, the family thread had gone quiet around me. Photos of Austin's promotion circulated, captions full of pride, but no one tagged me anymore. Mom sent the occasional text, "We miss you at Sunday dinner," but I didn't answer. And oddly, instead of feeling hollow, the distance felt clean, like a wound that had been infected for years was finally able to heal once it was exposed to air. One night, around midnight, I reopened the running tabs folder. I scrolled through the files, not with bitterness this time, but with clarity. Every receipt, every message, every imbalance I had endured was now part of a record not of victimhood, but of proof. Proof of what I'd carried, what I'd survived, and why I was stronger now. For the first time, I renamed the folder. I called it Foundation, because that's what it had become, the bedrock on which I was finally building something of my own. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the new name on the screen, and I realized the rise wasn't just happening in my career or my finances. It was happening in me. I was no longer the quiet son who could be erased with a shrug. I had proof. I had power. And, for the first time, I had the will to use both. The only question was when. It started with an email I almost ignored. 2 weeks into this new rhythm, clients flowing, accounts secure, distance from my family holding steady, I saw a message land in my inbox from Priya at Northpoint HR. The subject line read, "Follow-up on expense authorization case." I clicked, half expecting a routine closure note. Instead, it was more than that. "Dear Mason," it began, "thank you again for your cooperation. We've completed our internal review. While the fraudulent charges did not affect your standing, the documentation you provided revealed a pattern of expense misuse tied to multiple employee accounts. This is now an internal matter, but we wanted you to be aware that your assistance helped us uncover a larger issue." Attached were redacted statements, not mine, but company accounts where expense authorizations had been duplicated or inflated. The amounts were staggering, far beyond the $900 hold I'd noticed. Thousands, then tens of thousands, all tied to client entertainment and social events. Priya's careful wording told me enough. Austin wasn't just dipping into my card. He'd been weaving a bigger pattern, one the company had now spotted. I sat back in my chair, heart racing. My brother wasn't just reckless. He was sloppy. And in his sloppiness, he'd left trails I had accidentally helped expose. That night, as I scrolled through the folder I'd renamed Foundation, I realized something important. All those years of keeping records, texts, receipts, even screenshots I'd once taken just to remind myself I wasn't imagining things, weren't just therapy. They were leverage. My family had dismissed me because they thought my reliability meant silence. They hadn't considered that my silence had always been filled with careful, undeniable evidence. The timing couldn't have been more fitting. My studio had just landed a high-profile client, a mid-sized tech company whose name carried weight in the local press. They asked if I would be open to a case study, maybe even a feature about local entrepreneurs. For the first time, I wasn't just working behind the scenes. People wanted to highlight me, my name, my work. I accepted, and as I prepared for the interview, I realized how much control I now held. I had a platform, a growing business, proof of betrayal that stretched back years. And, thanks to Austin's arrogance, I had stumbled across the kind of evidence that could unravel his carefully curated rising star image. The question wasn't if I could strike back. It was how. So I began assembling a second folder, parallel to foundation. I called it Blueprint. This one wasn't just records of the past. It was strategy. Into it, I dropped notes like puzzle pieces. HR statement, with redactions, but enough to show misuse existed. Screenshots of dad instructing me to cover bills. Copies of transactions where my card was used without consent. Messages from mom urging me to let it go and keep it quiet. Piece by piece, I built a picture. Not dramatic, not messy, just undeniable. But I didn't send it anywhere. Not yet. Timing mattered. If I moved too early, it would look like spite. If I moved too late, they might wriggle free. I needed the right stage, the right moment when the cost of ignoring me would outweigh the cost of acknowledging me. And then, almost as if the universe wanted to underline my thinking, an invitation arrived. A family wedding, one of our cousins, scheduled for 3 months later. The message in the family thread was chirpy, full of dress codes and song requests. Mom tagged me directly. "You'll be there, right, Mason? Wouldn't be family without you." I stared at the words, my lips curling into something between a smile and a grimace. They wanted me there, the reliable presence, the steady sun, the silent background. But what they didn't realize was that by the time that wedding came, I wouldn't be standing in the background anymore. I would be holding the stage. The wedding was set for a Saturday in late spring, held at a vineyard an hour outside the city. My cousin had rented a sprawling hall draped in white lights, long tables stretching out under a ceiling of timber beams. The kind of place where laughter echoes, where people sip champagne and take photos in front of rustic barrels, where appearances matter almost as much as vows. In the weeks leading up, I kept my distance. I answered family texts politely but briefly, never enough to give them a read on my mood. Austin tried twice to call me, both times leaving voicemails that danced between guilt and self-preservation. "Bro, you know none of that was personal. HR's chill, everything's fine now. Just don't stir stuff, okay?" His voice cracked on the word fine, as if even he knew the ground beneath him was thinning. I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because I had already decided the wedding wasn't just a family reunion. It was my stage. The night arrived warm and fragrant, the vines heavy with early blooms. Guests filed in dressed in pastels and polished shoes, laughter spilling across the lawn. I wore a dark suit, not flashy, but clean, tailored, and sharp enough to make me feel like I belonged at the center, not the sidelines. As I stepped through the entrance, I could feel eyes glance toward me with the faint surprise of someone they hadn't expected to see. Mom's face lit up with relief. Dad's with that controlled neutrality he wore when he wasn't sure whether to scold or smile. Austin, across the room, froze for half a second before plastering on a grin. "Glad you made it, Mason," he said when he came over, clasping my shoulder too tightly. His breath smelled faintly of wine already. "Let's not make tonight about other stuff." I smiled evenly. "Of course. Tonight's about family." Dinner came after the vows. Long tables laden with plates of roasted lamb and pasta, wine flowing freely. Speeches started, toasts ringing out, and laughter swelled with every raised glass. It was during dessert that I made my move. The DJ had just lowered the music, giving way to the best man's rambling toast. People were laughing, clinking forks against plates of tiramisu. I excused myself quietly, stepped toward the AV booth in the corner, and handed the technician a small USB drive. "Play this next," I said calmly. The bride asked for it. He nodded without question. When the best man finished and applause rippled through the hall, the lights dimmed slightly. A screen lowered at the front of the room, and a video began to play. At first, it looked like a slideshow, smiling family photos, vacations, celebrations. A few people cheered, thinking it was part of the wedding montage. But then the transitions changed. Screenshots of text messages appeared. Dad instructing me to just cover the bill. Mom writing, "Please keep this quiet." Austin's late-night requests for loans, followed by charges tied to my card. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Conversations stilled. The video didn't need narration. It told itself, sliding calmly from one record to the next. Dates. Numbers. The $3,812 dinner receipt. The fraudulent $900 lounge charge. And finally, the HR note. Redacted, but enough to show that misuse of company funds had been uncovered. The last slide held only a sentence. If love is presence, then count with me. For a moment, silence ruled the hall. Then whispers began, sharp and pointed. I didn't look at the screen. I looked at my family. Mom's hand was over her mouth, her eyes wide and glassy. Dad's face had gone stone still, his jaw tight with the effort not to explode in public. Austin looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. He stood, half shaking, scanning the crowd as if someone might laugh and say it was all a prank. But no one laughed. Guests murmured louder now, heads turning toward my parents, toward Austin. One relative leaned across the table, whispering too loudly, "Is this real?" Another hissed. I knew something was off. I raised my glass, calm and steady, and said softly but clearly enough to carry, "Family is about presence." So I thought it was time to show up. Then I drank. The screen faded to black. The DJ, confused, restarted the music, but it couldn't mask the weight that had settled over the room. People shifted uncomfortably, conversations sparking in hushed tones. Austin came toward me, face pale, voice a whisper edged with panic. "What did you do? You're ruining me." I looked him in the eye, for once not blinking, not softening. "No, Austin, you did that yourself. I just stopped cleaning it up for you." He opened his mouth to argue, but the bride's father cut in first, his voice sharp. "We're not having this here. Take it outside." So I did. I stepped out into the cool night air, leaving the murmurs and fractured music behind. The vines swayed gently in the breeze, and for the first time in years, I felt taller than my shadow. Because revenge, I realized, wasn't about destruction. It was about truth, finally given the room to breathe. And in that vineyard, under the strings of wedding lights, my truth had finally taken center stage. The fallout came faster than even I expected. By the next morning, my phone was buzzing with messages, not just from family, but from friends of friends who had been at the wedding. The video had already been clipped, passed around, and whispered about. It wasn't gossip anymore. It was public. Austin tried calling me first. 6 missed calls by 9 a.m., then a text. "Please, just talk to me before this gets worse." I didn't answer. At 11 a.m., a relative forwarded me a screenshot. North Point's HR department had quietly begun an internal audit. By noon, Austin's LinkedIn profile was temporarily unavailable. Mom showed up at my door later that day, mascara smudged, clutching a tissue like a flag of surrender. "You didn't have to do this," she said, voice trembling. "You could have come to us. You didn't have to humiliate your brother." I stepped aside, let her in, and handed her a copy of the manila envelope I had once brought to their house. The ledger, the receipts, the proof. "I did come to you," I said evenly. "You told me to be quiet. You told me to take the fall. This isn't humiliation, Mom. This is accountability." She looked at the paper, but she didn't argue. She just sat on my couch and wept, not for me, but for the image of the family she had always tried to protect. Dad's call came that evening. His voice was low, stripped of its usual authority. "They've suspended him," he said. "He may lose everything. Are you happy now?" I held the phone close and answered calmly. "I'm not happy. I'm free. There's a difference." And then I hung up. In the weeks that followed, the dominoes fell. North Point terminated Austin's contract. Word spread quietly in professional circles, and he moved out of the city, the shine of his rising star dulled almost overnight. Dad's reputation in the neighborhood slipped too. No more boasting about his sons at barbecues. He avoided eye contact when he walked into the diner. Mom stopped posting photos of family celebrations. The silence between them and me became permanent. But in that silence, I thrived. My studio grew beyond what I had thought possible. Clients trusted me, not because I was flashy, but because I had built a reputation for being steady and precise, the very traits my family had once used to exploit me. Only now, they weren't weaknesses. They were my strength. Months later, at a small cafe, Elias raised a toast over coffee. "To finally being seen," he said with a grin. I laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from deep in your chest, the kind that feels like reclaiming something lost. That night, back at my apartment, I opened the folder one last time. Foundation was no longer a wound. It was a record of survival, of proof that the quiet one wasn't invisible after all. I closed the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and felt the weight finally lift. For the first time in 30 years, I wasn't the steady one carrying everyone else's load. I was just Mason, whole, standing unburdened. And as I turned off the lights, a thought struck me, simple and final. Sometimes the sharpest revenge isn't fire or fury. It's walking away with your name intact while theirs burns down on its own.